Welcome to The Law Spot, a podcast to highlight legal professionals and trending legal issues facing entrepreneurs and small business owners. I'm your host, Melissa Gray. Join me as we dive into life and law and spotlight businesses making waves in the space, professionals excelling in their careers, and fellow lawyers alike. Thanks for listening. Hi, everyone. Today on the show, we're excited to have Megan White, partner, IP, and patent attorney at Baker Botts here in Dallas, Texas. Megan was recently named as one of D Magazine's best lawyers under 40, and she's going to share her experience and advice for lawyers that are considering entering into the patent field, as well as her experiences practicing patent law in a big law firm. So, hi, Megan, and welcome to The Law Spot.
Hi, Melissa. Thanks so much for having me.
So first, congrats on D Magazine. Big honor, so well deserved.
Thank you.
We have a lot to cover, but I want to focus on sort of your path to the law, how you ultimately chose patent law, and then transition to like what qualities young lawyers or aspiring law students may need to excel in patent law specifically, because it's a big area. There's a lot of innovation and change. And I feel like it takes a very special person to sort of excel in that field. So why don't you introduce yourself and tell us like what attracted you to law in general, and then maybe patent law specifically.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa. So I guess like a lot of patent lawyers, I was an engineer in college and decided that I didn't want to pursue that full time. And I guess I should step back and say, I'm from Dallas. I've grown up in Dallas my whole life. And a fun fact about me is my parents are not from Dallas. They're from California and St. Louis. And they moved here in the 80s boom to raise a family and for my dad's job, which is relevant because he is also an attorney. So I kind of grew up with an attorney, a big law attorney, trial litigator. And as a kid, I was always like, oh, I don't want to do what my dad does. And I'd ask him all the time, Dad, what do you do all day? And, he would say, Megan, I solve problems. I was like, what is that? I'm like 8 years old. I'm like, what does that even mean? Because, answering phones and writing memos, answering calls and writing memos is not like understandable to an 8-year-old either. But so growing up, I never wanted to be an attorney. I was like actively against it. I was always good at math and science. So when I went to college, I was like, okay, I'm going to start in engineering. I can always transfer out. And I did engineering and enjoyed it, but didn't see a long-term career for me in engineering. I didn't love it, like the kids who use Legos as kids or like take apart their family's vacuum. So I was looking for another avenue, and kind of law started to creep into my head. And so I was like, well, maybe. And so I eventually I had mentioned it to my parents at one point, and they were like, yeah, very supportive, do whatever you want to do. But they were like, we think you'd be great at this. So after I had spent my whole life resisting, I was like, okay, maybe I'll look into it. So senior year, I took the LSAT, went to law school, had never heard of patent law, didn't know it was a thing. And then I go to law school as an engineer, and everyone's like, well, you're going to go into patent law, right? I was like, yeah, I've never heard of this. I don't know what it is. But as I started looking into it, I took a bunch of classes. I worked as a summer associate, actually at Baker Botts, my current law firm, got a good dose and was totally hooked. And I knew it was the perfect intersection for me of engineering and law.
Which engineering avenue were you focused on?
So I did civil engineering in undergrad. And so that's bridges and highways and buildings, things that aren't supposed to move in theory. And so truthfully, it's not super relevant to the work I do today or the clients that I work with today. But a lot of patent lawyers have engineering backgrounds, so they're comfortable with technology. They're comfortable talking to the engineers of their clients, figuring out how their clients' products work, and then being a translator to judge, jury, client, whoever the other end is.
And so Baker Botts, you summer associate there, and you've been there ever since. So you're like in the few of the few that really has never changed places. That's so rare to hear nowadays, but they must.
Yeah.
What attracted you to stay throughout all of that time, and how did they nurtured your growth and supported you through that as you've now become partner. I think that would be really valuable to hear about.
Yes. So I worked, I knew I wanted to be in Dallas, and I knew I wanted to do patent law. So that really narrowed it down for me very quickly in what law firms I wanted to pursue. So I worked at Baker Botts my 2L summer. I actually clerked for a judge right after graduation. So I joined Baker Botts in 2013, but you get credit for your clerkship year in your, being up for partner in your tenure as what associate year you are. But the reason I've stayed, I'm asked this all the time in interviews, particularly from law students. So it's a great question to ask if you're in law school and you're trying to figure out different law firms to see what people love about their law firm. But for me, it's number one, it's the people. People that I work with are amazing. They are smart and kind and compassionate people who, when I'm busy with life or when I'm busy with a bunch of work, you have somebody on the team who will come say, hey, let me take that off your plate. Or how are you doing? Do you have too much work? Do you have too little work? So number one, the people and just feeling supported. But number two, the training. You have to look at a place that's going to make you a great lawyer. I hope to be at Baker Botts my whole career. I hope to be at this law firm and stay and, take over the firm one day. But you never know when you start at a law firm. And so that's advice I give young law students or people pursuing law school is choose a law firm that's going to make you a great lawyer, because that makes you more marketable no matter what path you want to take after you potentially leave that law firm.
So you're so active. You have been involved in you
too much.
I'm pretty sure you told me at one point that you have such a hard time saying no. You end up doing so many things, which served you well. And I'm sure you've had to say no a lot more in your months now that you have a young child. But what was the organization like? If someone's going to get involved on the bar side or elsewhere, because you're also in junior league and other things, what has been the most beneficial for you in sort of giving you a more well-rounded networking community, and what does that look like for you?
So I think I would advise people to be purposeful about what they're involved in. It's not useful to join 10 organizations and, be a poor member of all of them. It's much better to join one or two organizations and be very committed. So first to that, I think I did a poor job of that when I was a young associate. I just was always in all the clubs and thought I had to do all the clubs, and that is not right. But eventually I narrowed it down and made a rule where, okay, I have 2 things outside of work that I'm committed to every year, and that's my maximum. And so I think whatever people are genuinely interested in, you can be involved in the bar. I did Dallas Association of Young Lawyers, or DYL, for a long time, and I loved knowing other lawyers in the community who understood what I was working on or going through, but I couldn't talk into detail about it, right? It's like, oh, I'm working on a motion for summary judgment, or, oh, I'm in the middle of discovery and opposing counsel is the worst. People get it, but they can't talk to you about your specific case. So I really enjoyed that. I've also been very involved, you mentioned, in the Junior League of Dallas, and I've loved working with women. When I started at my law firm, we didn't have as many women in the patent group as we do now. And so I needed an outlet to kind of work with like-minded women who wanted to serve and better the community. And so those were some of the things that I really grasped onto and wanted to get more involved in and work on. But my advice, truthfully, is whatever people are very interested in, whatever energizes you outside of work. That can be anything from like a bar activity to like needlepoint, right? Or running, or, art. It's anything that fills up your cup outside of work. It is my best advice.
Well, and in that same vein, patent attorneys, you're a very outgoing patent attorney. I've met quite a few.
Maybe too much.
But do you think that you are outgoing more so than some of like maybe your colleagues that are in this space? And like what does that look like for you, communicating with a lot of introverts and intellectuals as a more outgoing patent attorney? Because you're not boring, you're not dry.
Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah, of course.
No, interestingly, it was hard. And the people I work with are all amazing, and yes, lean introverted, and my clients, especially the engineers, often lean introverted. But but it's kind of tough sometimes to be a bubbly, positive, energetic woman lawyer. And so when I started, I actually had a little bit of a complex of inferiority and feeling like I didn't belong because, I was in meetings and as lawyers, we're focused on worst case scenario and how to prevent bad things from happening. And I didn't want to come across as a Pollyanna, right? It'll be fine, right? Even though I'm generally very positive. And so truthfully, I think it was my second year as an associate through the Junior League of Dallas, I took a StrengthsFinders test. And so if people aren't familiar with StrengthsFinders, it has like 30 different strengths or attributes and it ranks them for you in order. And you really focus on your top 5 strengths. And so unsurprisingly, my number 1 strength was positivity. And the whole idea behind StrengthsFinders is you lean into your strengths and you don't worry about your weaknesses, right? Sometimes you can like move things around, but for the most part, they're pretty set. And so I've changed my perspective and said, okay, it's good. Like how many lawyers are positive, empathetic, harmonious, that are really good at communication, and want to maximize the situation. Those are my top 5 strengths. And so I saw it more of an asset in like team building and what I'm adding to the team than a detriment. And so of course, it's so obvious, right? Like we all have our own strengths and you all lean into your own strengths, but I needed that change in perspective to feel like I fit in. But now I see it, like you were mentioning, as a huge asset to be different than the people that I surround myself by.
And you mentioned that your patent group specifically had not a lot of women at the beginning. How has that dynamic changed in the 12 years that you've been practicing now? And have you had any say in the new hires and shaping that like sort of next generation of your group?
Yes. When I started, we had 4 women, including me and the other woman associate who was starting with me. Mm-hmm. So we doubled in size that year. And there had been other women before. It was just kind of, that was the numbers at the time. And it was no fault of Baker Botts. It was just, a lot of women don't go into engineering. And then of engineers, a lot of women don't go to law school. And so, so it's been really fun to like build the group out and expand the group. And to Baker Botts' credit, they've had a real focus on diversity and inclusion the last 10 years that I've been here. So kind of the rise in that. And then also, I got involved at the firm, right? I was involved in the employment committee. I was involved in recruiting. And, I made it a point to hire more women, to hire people like me and to hire people not like me to help round out our group. But it just so happens that our numbers have gone up a lot in the last 10 years of women. And now I think our group is about a third or a quarter women, which in patent law is very rare and is a lot of the good feedback we get. And like I used to have to be on every law school interview because I was like one of the only women in the firm. Was like, we got to show that we have women at the firm. And now like I don't have to be on any of them. So it's been a fun change and dynamic to not be the only woman in the room and have that be very normal.
Awesome. So being a bubbly personality, your second year, you find out like, okay, maybe you hit your stride and get a little more confidence. That first 5 years, like what advice beyond the play to your strengths would you give somebody in that initial phase of their career, sort of that maybe is working to find their stride and working with the partners directly as a young associate?
So yeah, I would, 2 things come to mind. One, focus on your strengths, right? And, you don't have to shy away from anything you're not already good at, right? Melissa, like we learn so much of our job on the job. Law school doesn't teach you how to be a patent attorney, how to be a trademark attorney. So be curious is my first piece of advice. Of if you're worried about fitting in, about knowing the right answer, you're going to be really stressed out all the time and you're never going to feel like enough. But if you're curious, that's a much better positive mindset to be in. It's like, if you ask the person you're working with, oh, I'm curious why we made that decision, or I want to go dig into this technology and figure out how it works. It makes it a lot more fun and a lot less intimidating to come at it from curiosity than to come at it from fear. So that would be my first. The second is that you don't have to do everything. So I think sometimes associates get in, in patent litigation, a lot of times we have a big team and we have a distribution list where we send an email to the big team. And so the partner will send an email to the whole team and say, hey, what do we think about this? And the associate feels the need to respond immediately. And it's like, well, is that the part of the case you're handling? Sometimes you copy all of the people on the team in case other people have different aspects. And so if you're on one patent and this kind of has to do with another part, don't feel like you have to be the end all be all for this case. That's why we have a team. That's why we split up responsibilities. Otherwise it would just be, one or two people on a team. And I see that so often from associates of just the overwhelm because of all the emails, but knowing that it's not your role to answer every single one or to dig in on every part of a case is really helpful. And you can ask for clarity, right? Like, is this something you want me to, happy to dig in, curious if you want me to dig in on this or if someone else is better suited. I have a soapbox of a lot of advice, but I'll stop there with those two pieces for the first.
No, I think that's important. And the fear of asking questions because you don't want to sound stupid or you don't want to piss somebody off. Like, that's the question. Actually, I encourage the question because you're actually saving me time. Like, I view it that way now. I didn't as a young associate. I was like, I'm not asking anything because that's scary.
Melissa, that's such a good point. We used to get hired by a client and I thought we had to know how their products worked. Like, I was like, I can't ask questions because I'm supposed to know this already, which is objectively ridiculous. Like, they have stuff that's secretive and stuff that like isn't out in the public.
And they barely know how it works sometimes. Right. So it's okay that you have questions about it. But and asking your partner like the scope, the deliverable expectation, the timing, all of those things are actually really important because you don't want to not meet expectations or go beyond what the expectation was and then overbill. It's like this walking the fine line of the clarity is always that's a really good one. So
Melissa, I want to add. I just want to add one thing to that, and I give this advice to summer associates. If I give a younger associate like a project and they have no questions, I don't think they've taken in anything.
Understood.
So I always tell them, I'm like, ask at least one question or repeat back what you heard, right? Because if you just say it to a blank face, then I'm like, ooh, I don't have any confidence that that person understands any of the stuff that I just said. So it's better to ask questions. And if you look at the most senior lawyer in a client meeting, 90% of the time that lawyer, if it's a good lawyer, is asking questions.
Tons of questions. Yeah.
And so it's ridiculous that I thought I couldn't ask any questions because they're asking questions because it matters. We give advice. And so like, if you're giving a friend advice, you don't just like, she says, oh, I'm having a problem, with a classmate of mine. You don't just start talking advice. You say, oh, well, what's the issue? And did this happen? Did that happen? I mean, it's the same in the law, and it's so silly that it took me so long to figure that out.
Well, great point. Well, if we turn to more like you're established at Baker Botts a little bit, years 5 to 10, like you're now sort of more ingrained in the practice. Like, how did you transition from, baby associate that is reporting directly to like being in a more independent role and then gearing up towards your partnership track?
Yeah. So I would say 5 to 10 years, I really started to take more of a leadership role on the team, kind of a spoken wheel aspect. I really love.
Ask for it, or did they just give it to you?
So it was one case where we pitched the case, and it was sort of the expectation. Like the client was like, we expect her to run the show, and I was probably like a 6th or 7th year, and so I really just took that on and was like, okay, I'm expected to run the show. Before that, it had been a little of like, the team is chaotic and I need some organization, so let me be the organizer. But it was sort of managing up. Like I was sort of like, okay, let me be the person who's taking the notes and herding the cats is what I always say, like getting the stuff like from different people. And I was happy to do that role because I love that stuff. Not everybody loves that, and not everyone should do that role. And sometimes I raise my hand too much for that. But I would say that was kind of the natural transition for me of sort of being the person who came up with the strategy, who talked to the client, who delegated more, which is still very hard for me. But and then also teaching, right? Like that's a really fun part for me, the mentoring and the teaching of young associates and setting them up for success and training them to be wonderful lawyers. I mean, that's a lot of the fun for me too. So in the 5 to 10 years, it was more interaction with the client, more strategy focused, and more, organizing of the team, I would say.
So have you found yourself, I mean, your work is very intellectual, meticulous. Do you find yourself ever getting bored with what you're doing and wanting to stray outside the patent space? Or are you able to find enough diversity in order to keep you curious and, those buttons like checked?
Yeah. So the nice thing, like 80% of what I do is patent litigation. So either my client or someone else owns a patent or several and sues another company for it. So often I do defense work, but I do plenty of plaintiff's work too. So the nice thing about that is every case, the technology is usually different. So the framework of patent law is the same. Patent litigation is the same. You get sued, you do claim construction, you figure out what the patent means, and particularly the claims, summary judgment, trial, et cetera. So the framework is similar and strategies are similar, but the technology is different. And the patents are different and the parties are different. And so I get enough structure from the similarity and difference from the other external factors that it keeps it exciting for me. So that's within patent litigation, which is 80% of what I do. I also have a little bit of prosecution that I do too. And so prosecution is poorly named, but it's prosecuting a patent is writing and filing a patent and sending it to the U.S. Patent Office. And then you go back and forth and correspond back and forth until a patent is issued. And so that's a really fun part because I'm working with my client on the front end. So they have this great idea. Is it worth patenting? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about this idea. Let's talk about what else it could do. Let's talk about your portfolio. So kind of strategy on the front end is really fun too. So because I have a mix, that makes it generally more interesting as well. But I don't know. I haven't gotten any itch to go outside yet. But maybe in 10 years, I'll be criminal attorney.
Oh, man. Well, you also, so no change on that front, but you did recently have a baby. So congratulations.
I did.
I mean, not that recently. He's like, 7 months now?
Yeah, he's getting older every day.
You're about to be mobile, so the game will change.
Mm-hmm.
But, how did BakerBot support you on your maternity leave? Like, how have you found the transition back to being full time and still being on the partnership? In the partnership with BakerBots, how's that been for you?
Yeah, I felt super supported. So it was partnership was announced February of 2022, so last year, and I was already pregnant, but only like 3 or 4 months pregnant, so nobody knew. So I was very nervous about them saying, "Hey, you made partner," and maybe say, "Hey, I'm pregnant. I'm going to take off some time this summer." Literally everyone was so supportive. I going in was like, oh, should I take off less time? Like, should I have a shorter leave? Should I, work during it? And everyone was very like, don't do that. Take your time. Enjoy this time. I was like, just call me if you need. They were like, we're not going to call you. Like what I needed to hear because I'm my own worst critic. And so it was like, oh, it's going to look terrible if I take this time off. Nobody cared. Actually, one of the partners I work with, I kind of did like a summary document of portions of a case I was working on to turn over to someone to handle while I was out. And the partner was like, I think we should have somebody have a kid on every case we're on so that we have this moment where we just like sit down, summarize, strategize, and like think about where we are in the case. He was like, I think we should do it. And, I don't know if he was being serious, but it made me feel a whole lot better. To just be like, okay, maybe this is a positive. And so it was really, really nice to go out on leave and to just feel like my team had my back, everything was taken care of. And when I came back, I was still part of the team. It wasn't other people took over or whatever. There was still a role for me, and it's still an active part of that team and in all the other teams I've been on. I mean, 4 months is what I took off, and it feels like a lot. But in the grand scheme of a case, or in the grand scheme of a career, it's really a blip on the radar. So,
nothing. I know. Well, I've taken 3, so
yes.
and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And honestly, you go through so much emotionally and physically, like you need that time. I can't imagine trying to interweave that with cases as stressful as some of the ones that attorneys deal with while you're going through that. So I'm glad to hear that they were, supporting you. What have you found to be like the most challenging on the other side, now that you're like balancing it all, or trying, we do our best, but how have you navigated parenthood since you've gone back to work, and how are you finding like that work-life balance that everyone strives for that doesn't exist?
So it's especially difficult for me because I want to do all the things, and I have typically done all the things. And so it's just me being a lot more mindful. Like, one of my resolutions this year is to be home during the week, to be home for bedtime, minimum of 2 nights a week. And so that in itself has been like, okay, I have this meeting I could go to after work. I could work late this night. Am I going to meet my 2 nights a week threshold? Like, it helps me just say no a little bit easier. And most of the time I'm home for bedtime more than 2 nights a week. It just helps me on those busier weeks kind of put frame of mind of, no, I committed to this. And truthfully, I have the most supportive husband in the world. He loves being a dad. He loves our son. He's super supportive of my career, and he's more than happy to do bedtime. I do kind of the morning before we have help, and then Tim does the evening, afternoon. And so I can kind of make plans as I need to for work events, life after work, that sort of thing. So it's definitely an exercise in saying no more and just figuring out what I want to spend my time on. Could I work late every night? Absolutely. Like, I have plenty of things to do. Could I go to bar activities every night, or, junior league activities, or go out with friends? Like, sure, absolutely. But for me, it's just kind of, okay, what do I want my time to look like? And he's only little for a little bit. And so I want to make sure I'm loving this little baby while he's still a baby.
Gotta do it.
I know.
Well,
it's hard.
I'm so happy for you. I want to be respectful of your time, but as we close, I think I want to ask you just your number one takeaway for someone that's considering patent law and like visualize like an aspiring lawyer or law student, and give them like your top piece of advice for being successful in your field.
So there are a couple different ways I could go here. So I'm trying to figure out the way I want to go.
You know them all. I don't care.
But top piece of advice is, I would say, think of your career in the long term. I have so many law students I talk to who feel like their job right out of law school have to be their forever job. And that is so not true. I've been out of law school for over 10 years now, over 10 years. And so many of my friends have had many different jobs.
Well,
and
you're the exception, not the rule.
I know.
Honestly, you are. It's a great, it's so
I'm loyal to a fault.
You've stayed so long, but like, you are not the average career path.
But I would just say, think of it as long term. Like, you don't have to know what you want to do with your whole career your first year of law school. There are people who come out and do one type of law and then switch around. And I would just say, like, your career is long. And so find something you really love and that you want to do, and not going to love it every day, all day. But if you love it, more days than not, then you're doing okay. And so think of your career in the long term and don't put so much pressure on yourself to figure out what you're going to be right away, would be my biggest takeaway.
I love that. Well, I can't thank you enough for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Give our best to the baby. And thank you again for joining. And we'll see everybody next time.
Sounds good. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you for tuning in to The Law Spot. If you enjoyed the podcast, show some love with a 5-star review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And be sure to follow along on social for updates on the latest episodes and the law.